Imagine a door. It is heavy, oak-timbered, and reinforced with iron. On one side, there is the world you know, the smell of rain, the hope of a better life, the family you left behind. On the other side, there is a silence so thick it feels like a physical weight. You are told this is your future. You are told this is a blessing. But as the bolts slide into place and the echo of the closing gate dies out, you realize the truth. This isn't a school. It isn't a court. It is a slaughterhouse. And you are not a student. You are inventory. The mountains of Hungary do not care about your dreams. They are jagged, cold, and ancient. Nestled deep within them, rising like a jagged tooth from the earth, sits the castle. To a peasant girl from the valley, it looks like heaven. It looks like an escape. Her name is unimportant. In the eyes of the world, she is a ghost before she even dies. Her father, a man with calloused hands and a back bent from the plow, saved every coin for this day. He thinks he is saving her. He thinks he is giving her a chance to learn the arts of the nobility, how to speak, how to sew, how to serve with grace. He kisses her forehead, hands her over to the carriage driver, and watches her disappear into the mist. He will spend the rest of his life waiting for a letter that will never come. She arrives at the gates as the sun begins to dip below the peaks. The castle is magnificent. It is a monument to power. The stone is cold, but the interior glows with the flicker of 1,000 candles. She is greeted by a woman whose voice is like velvet, the Countess herself, Elizabeth Bathory. She is beautiful. She is refined. She is one of the most powerful women in all of Europe. She smiles, and for a moment the girl feels safe. Then the doors close. It is a specific sound. A heavy, final thud. It is the sound of a lid closing on a coffin. The girl is led down a hallway. The air changes. The scent of lavender and expensive wax fades. It is replaced by something else. Something sharp. Something metallic. It is the smell of a butcher shop on a hot day. She notices the servants. They do not look at her. They keep their eyes on the floor. Their movements are mechanical, haunted. They aren't just serving a mistress. They are surviving a predator. The girl is taken to a small room. There are no windows, just a bed and a basin of water. She is told to wait. She thinks about her lessons. She thinks about the music she was promised. She doesn't know that the only music she will hear in this castle is the sound of her own voice pleading for a mercy that does not exist here. Elizabeth Bathory was not born a monster. She was born a kingmaker. Her family tree is a forest of crowns and swords. Her uncle was the king of Poland. Her cousins were princes. When a Bathory speaks, Europe listens. When a Bathory kills, the world looks away. This is the protection of the bloodline. This is the shield that allows a nightmare to grow behind closed doors for 20 years. The girl hears footsteps, not the soft glide of a lady, but a rhythmic, predatory pace. The door opens. The Countess is no longer smiling. She is looking at the girl, but not as a human being. She is looking at her like a piece of cloth to be cut, like a fruit to be squeezed. The first strike is sudden. It isn't a correction. It is a declaration. The girl's life as she knew it is over. The opportunity of a lifetime has just become a countdown to an unmarked grave. She is one of hundreds, maybe more. Nobody is counting. In 16th century Hungary, a peasant girl is a shadow, and shadows vanish in the dark. Stay with us till the end for valuable insight. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The girl learns quickly that the castle is not a home. It is a machine designed to break the spirit before it destroys the body. In the first few days, she is kept in a state of perpetual confusion. Hunger is her first companion. Exhaustion is her second. Elizabeth knows that a tired victim is a quiet victim. The lessons begin, but they are not the lessons her father paid for. There is no needlework here, at least not the kind that produces tapestries. Instead, the Countess introduces the girl to the tools of the household. A pair of heavy, rusted shears. A set of long, slender silver needles. A wooden block. At first, the girl thinks she is meant to use them. She is wrong. She is the canvas upon which these tools will be applied. Elizabeth Bathory enters the room with a cold, clinical precision. She does not scream. She does not rant. She speaks in the measured tones of a teacher, explaining exactly why the girl is about to suffer. A dropped plate, a misinterpreted look, a strand of hair out of place. Anything serves as a catalyst for the descent into madness. The Countess picks up a needle. She holds it to the light, admiring the way the steel glints. Then she begins. She doesn't just prick the skin. She maps the nerves. She finds the places where the pain is the sharpest, the webs between the fingers, the sensitive skin beneath the eyes, the soft flesh of the inner arms. One needle becomes 10. 10 become 20. The testimony of those who survived long enough to witness this described a horrifying sight. They said Elizabeth would work with such feverish intensity that the victim eventually ceased to look human. They used a specific word, hedgehog, because by the time the Countess was satisfied, the girl's body was covered in so many protruding needles that she resembled a creature of thorns. The blood didn't pour. It seeped, slow and thick, as the girl was forced to stand perfectly still. If she moved, the needles went deeper. If she cried out, more were added. This was the linguistic DNA of Elizabeth's cruelty. It was systematic. It was a ritual. She wasn't just venting anger. She was conducting an experiment in human endurance. She would lean in close, her face inches from the victims, watching the pupils dilate, listening to the hitch in their breath. She was drinking in the terror. But the needles were only the introduction. When the Countess grew bored of the delicate work, she reached for the scissors. These were not used for cutting cloth. They were used to reshape the girls. Elizabeth had a fixation on identity. She wanted to erase the beauty of the peasant girls she envied. She would use the blades to snip away parts of the ears, the nose, the lip. She was literally cutting away the humanity of her servants, piece by piece, until they couldn't even recognize themselves in a mirror. And through it all, the castle remained silent. The walls were thick, built to withstand sieges from Ottoman armies. They were more than capable of swallowing the screams of a dozen girls. The other servants moved through the halls like ghosts, cleaning up the spillage with buckets of ash and lye. They knew that to speak was to join the girl in the room. They knew that in this kingdom there was only one law, the whim of the Bathory. The girl, once full of hope, now looks at her hands and sees only wounds. She looks at the door and sees only a barrier. The woman she was supposed to serve has become the god of her destruction. And the nightmare is only getting started. As the weeks bleed into months, the girl realizes that Elizabeth's cruelty has no bottom. It is not enough to use tools. It is not enough to use cold steel or sharp silver. There is a hunger in the Countess that requires something more primal, something more intimate. The witnesses who eventually spoke, the ones who survived the heavy, suffocating silence of Castle Secht, all mentioned a detail that seems too animalistic to be true. But the testimonies were too consistent to ignore. Elizabeth Bathory used her teeth. It would happen in the height of her fury. She would be standing over a girl, perhaps one who was already weakened by the needles or the scissors. The Countess would lean in, her breathing coming in short, jagged gasps. And then she would sink her teeth into the flesh of the girl. She would bite the neck, the shoulders, the cheek. She wasn't just striking them, she was trying to consume them. This wasn't an act of a person who had lost their mind. It was the act of a woman who believed she was a different species. To Elizabeth, these peasant girls weren't people. They were cattle. They were resources. And just as a predator claims its prey, she marked them. Some girls were bitten so severely that pieces of their flesh were torn away. The Countess would walk away with blood on her lips, looking refreshed, while the girl was left to bleed out on the cold stone floor. But the horror didn't stop with the Countess. She had built a team of monsters to help her refine the pain. There was Ilona Jo, the nurse who had been with Elizabeth since she was a child. Ilona didn't just watch, she participated. She held the girls down. She muffled their screams. She was the one who suggested new ways to keep the girls alive longer so the entertainment wouldn't end too soon. Then there was Dorothea Sentes, known as Dorco. If Ilona was the strategist, Dorco was the executioner. She had a reputation for a heart made of flint. She was the one who handled the heavy iron tools. She was the one who ensured that even when Elizabeth was too tired to continue, the suffering did not pause. And finally there was the boy Fitzko. He was the one who dealt with the aftermath. He was the one who saw the reality of the numbers. He dragged the bodies. He dug the shallow graves in the dead of night. He saw the faces of the girls who had arrived with ribbons in their hair and left as unrecognizable piles of bone and torn skin. They worked in a dark harmony. A noblewoman, a nurse, a cruel older woman, and a boy. They turned the castle into a factory of death. They would move from room to room, the sound of their footsteps announcing a new round of lessons. The girls in the cellars would hear the keys jingle, and they would pray for death to come quickly. But in Elizabeth's castle, death was a privilege you had to earn. The girl who arrived to learn manners now learns the anatomy of her own pain. She learns how long a human can scream before the voice breaks. She learns how much blood a body can lose before the heart stops. And she learns that in the eyes of Elizabeth Bathory, she is less than the dirt beneath the castle's foundation. The Countess isn't just killing girls, she is feeding a darkness that has been growing for decades, and that darkness is now a black hole, pulling everything into its center. In the mountains of Hungary, winter is not just a season. It is a weapon. As the temperatures drop and the mountain passes choke with snow, Elizabeth Bathory finds new ways to use the elements. The stone walls of Castle Sedge become ice cold, but for the girls trapped inside, the cold is the least of their worries. Elizabeth develops a fascination with the contrast between heat and cold. She starts with fire. She has her accomplices heat metal objects, coins, keys, or simple iron rods, until they glow a dull, angry red. She doesn't use them to kill quickly. She uses them to brand. She watches as the skin bubbles and hisses, the smell of burning flesh filling the small, unventilated chambers. To her, this is discipline. To the girls, it is a living hell. Ilona Jo and Dorco stand by with more irons, ensuring the fire never goes out, keeping the heat constant while the screams echo off the frozen stone. But when the room becomes too hot, Elizabeth moves the lesson outside. She orders girls to be stripped naked and led into the courtyard in the middle of a blizzard. They are forced to stand in the waist-deep snow, their skin turning blue, then a sickly, numb white. But Elizabeth isn't finished. From her balcony, wrapped in thick furs and sipping warm wine, she watches as her servants pour buckets of water over the girls. The water freezes almost instantly. It turns the girls into living statues of ice. They are left there for hours. If they collapse, they are beaten until they stand again. If they die, they are simply left until the morning, when Fitzko can chop them out of the frozen earth like firewood. One witness described how Elizabeth would watch from a window, mesmerized by the way the human body tried to fight the cold until the heart simply gave up. During the warmer months, she flips the script. She covers the girls in honey and ties them to trees near the castle's edges. She waits for the insects, the wasps, the ants, the stinging flies. She wants to see how nature consumes a human being. She wants to see if the forest is as cruel as she is. It usually is. The girl from the valley, the one who came to learn manners, has now seen things that have broken her mind. She has seen her friends turned into hedgehogs by needles, statues by ice, and meals by insects. She realizes that Elizabeth isn't looking for a reason to punish them anymore. The Countess is bored, and aboard Elizabeth Bathory is the most dangerous creature in Europe. The local villagers begin to notice. They find bodies in the woods that the wolves won't even touch, bodies too mutilated to be the work of animals. They see the smoke rising from the castle chimneys at odd hours. They hear the chanting of the accomplices as they bury the dead in the churchyard at night. But they say nothing. You do not accuse a Bathory. You do not look at the castle. You just hold your breath and hope she doesn't notice your own daughter. But Elizabeth's hunger is growing. The peasant girls are no longer enough. The common blood is starting to feel mundane. She needs something more. She needs a new challenge. And that is when the most fatal idea in the history of the bloodline is born. Success breeds arrogance, and arrogance is a slow-acting poison. For 20 years, Elizabeth Bathory operated with total impunity. She believed she was untouchable because, for 2 decades, she was. But the darkness inside her is no longer satisfied with the common suffering of peasants. The peasant girls were easy. They were invisible. They were shadows that left no traces. Around 1609, a new figure enters Elizabeth's inner circle, Ursabit Majorova. She is a local widow, a woman whispered to be a witch, a woman who understands the darker cravings of the soul. Majorova looks at the aging countess and sees a woman terrified of the mirror. Elizabeth is nearing 50. In the 17th century, that is the twilight of life. The wrinkles are coming. The skin is sagging. The power that came with her beauty is slipping away. Majorova whispers a suggestion that changes everything. She tells Elizabeth that the reason the sacrifices aren't working is the quality of the blood. Peasant blood is thin. It is dirty. It is the blood of laborers and animals. If Elizabeth wants to stay young, if she wants to truly tap into the fountain of youth, she needs something refined. She needs noble blood, blue blood. It is a lie born of greed and malice, but Elizabeth devours it. She stops looking at the villages and starts looking at the lesser nobility. She opens the gates of Castle Sedged once again, but this time, the invitation is different. She announces the opening of a finishing school, an academy where daughters of lower-ranking noble families can come to learn the etiquette of the high court. To these families, it is a dream come true. To have a daughter trained by a Bathory is a guaranteed ticket to a powerful marriage. They send their daughters, girls who can read, girls who can play the lute, girls who have names that are recorded in the annals of the state. But once the gates lock, the academy reveals its true curriculum. The noble girls are treated exactly like the peasants. The needles do not care about their status. The scissors do not care about their family crest. Elizabeth finds a new, twisted pleasure in breaking these girls. She loves the way they plead, using their titles as if they were shields, only to realize that inside these walls, titles mean nothing. But Elizabeth has forgotten one crucial detail. Noble families have voices. When a peasant girl disappears, her father cries in a field and eventually moves on. When a noble girl disappears, her father goes to the local governor. He writes to the capital. He talks to his cousins in the military. Letters start to pile up. Questions are asked at court. Where is my daughter? Why has her correspondence stopped? Why is the Bathory woman refusing visitors? The silence from the castle is no longer interpreted as privacy. It is seen as a provocation. The King of Hungary, Matthias II, is already under pressure. He owes the Bathory family a massive amount of money from the wars. If he can find a reason to move against Elizabeth, he might be able to wipe out that debt and satisfy the angry nobles at the same time. He sends Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate. Thurzo is a man of the world, a man who has seen the horrors of the battlefield, but even he is not prepared for what is waiting behind the limestone walls of Sejd. He arrives unannounced, his soldiers flanking him, breaking the sanctity of the Countess's private estate. They don't have to look far. The smell hits them first, the rot of 100 secrets. In the courtyard, they find bodies. In the cellars, they find survivors who look like they have returned from the grave. And in the center of it all is Elizabeth, sitting at her table, cold and defiant. She believes her name will save her. She doesn't realize that she has finally killed someone the world cares about. The trial of 1611 was not a quest for truth. The truth was already screaming from the scars of the survivors and the mounds of earth in the graveyards. It was a political autopsy. One by one, the accomplices were brought before the judges. They were broken people, but they were also monsters. Ilona, Joe, and Dorko did not beg. They confessed. They spoke of the needles. They spoke of the 650 names recorded in a private book, a ledger of death written in Elizabeth's own hand. They described the hedgehog girls and the frozen statues in the courtyard. The judges, men who had seen the brutalities of war, had to look away. The sentence for the helpers was a mirror of their lives. Ilona and Dorko had their fingers torn off, the same fingers they had used to hold the needles and the scissors, before they were burned at the stake. Fitzko, the boy, was beheaded before being cast into the fire. Justice was swift, bloody, and public, but Elizabeth was different. She was a Bathory. The king could not execute her without causing a civil war among the nobility. He could not put her on a public stand without shaming every royal bloodline in Europe. So, they crafted a punishment that was more haunting than a scaffold. They decided to let the castle she loved become her coffin. On a cold night, stonemasons arrived at Castle Sejd. They didn't come to repair the walls. They came to seal them. They led Elizabeth into her own bedchamber. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She walked in with the same icy dignity she had worn for 50 years. Then, the masons began to work. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of stone hitting mortar. One by one, the windows were bricked up. The sunlight was choked out. The view of the mountains vanished. Finally, they reached the door. They built a wall of heavy stone where the entrance used to be, leaving only a tiny, narrow slit, just wide enough for a bowl of watery soup and a piece of bread to pass through. Elizabeth Bathory was buried alive in the dark. For 4 years, she lived in that silence. No mirrors to see her aging skin. No girls to torture. No voices to command. Only the sound of her own breathing and the scratching of rats in the walls. She went from the most powerful woman in Hungary to a ghost trapped in a box. The guards who pushed the food through the slot reported hearing nothing. No pleas for mercy. No prayers. Just a heavy, suffocating stillness. On August 21, 1614, the food remained untouched. When they finally broke through the wall, they found her. She was lying on the floor, her eyes open, staring at a ceiling she hadn't seen in the light for years. She died alone, in the dark, exactly like the hundreds of girls who had vanished into her shadow. The story of the Blood Countess became a legend, a campfire tale of bathing in blood to stay young. But the reality is far more terrifying. The reality is not a vampire or a witch. The reality is a woman who realized that power, when left unchecked, becomes a predatory animal. She wasn't stopped by a hero. She wasn't stopped by God. She was stopped because she made the mistake of thinking her status made her a god. Today, the ruins of Castle Szeged still stand on that Hungarian peak. The wind whistles through the broken stones, and the locals still avoid the path after sunset. They say the ground is soaked too deep with the tears of the forgotten to ever truly be at peace. Elizabeth Bathory's name is in every history book, but the names of the 650 girls are gone. They are the dust in the wind, the cold in the snow, and the silence behind the stone. The Blood Countess is dead. But the lesson remains. Darkness doesn't need a monster. It just needs a door that no one is allowed to open. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.